How does a routine commuter flight suddenly turn into a mid-air emergency no one can stabilize? How does an aircraft cruising smoothly at 18,000 feet suddenly begin shaking itself apart, without warning, without weather, without impact? And how does a normal engine, one that had just been working minutes earlier, become the source of a catastrophic failure in the sky? There was no storm, no mid-air collision, no explosion in the clouds. What happened instead was quieter, hidden, mechanical, and far more violent in its consequences. This was a normal flight departing from Atlanta, but never came back the same. Welcome to Tragic Flights, where we go beyond the headlines to examine what really happened in aviation disasters. So if you enjoy detailed aviation storytelling, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. On August 21st, 1995, a regional passenger flight prepared for departure from Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Its destination was Gulfport, Mississippi. A short domestic route, a familiar schedule, the kind of flight that blends into thousands of others in American airspace every single day. For most people inside the terminal that evening, Flight 529 was invisible in the way routine flights often are. Just another commuter aircraft preparing to leave the gate, another boarding announcement, another departure added to a screen already crowded with destinations. On board were 29 passengers and crew. Some were traveling for work, others were heading home. A few were simply connecting between cities, trusting the system to carry them safely, as it always had. There were business travelers expecting to arrive before night fully settled in. Families waiting at the other end of the route. People already thinking beyond the flight itself and toward whatever came after landing. No one boarding that aircraft they were stepping into one of the deadliest commuter airline accidents of the 1990s. The aircraft that was assigned to the flight was an Embraer EMB-120RT Brasilia, registration N256AS, a twin-engine turboprop widely used in regional operations across the United States. It was reliable, efficient, and familiar. Aircraft like the EMB-120 were built around practicality. They connected smaller cities to larger airline networks, carrying passengers on short routes that larger jets often could not serve efficiently. Inside the aviation industry, they had become a common sight throughout the early 1990s. It was not an aircraft designed to attract attention, but designed to move people quietly, consistently, and safely between smaller cities and major hubs. In the cockpit that evening were Captain Edwin "Ed" Ganaway and First Officer Matt Warmadam. Both pilots had flown regional routes before. The departure from Atlanta should have been straightforward, which is to climb to cruising altitude, settle into the route, and continue west toward Mississippi. As Flight 529 lifted off from Atlanta, everything appeared normal. The climb was steady. The systems were stable. Air traffic control cleared them into cruise. Nothing about the departure suggested urgency. No warning signs. No indication that the aircraft was carrying a hidden failure already moving toward catastrophe. And at around 18,000 feet, the aircraft settled into cruise flight. For the passengers, the experience was uneventful. Seatbelts were loosened. Conversations were softened. Some passengers even looked out at the Georgia landscape fading beneath clouds, while others simply relaxed into the rhythm of the flight, expecting to land within the hour. Everything felt ordinary, predictable, and above all, controlled. But inside the aircraft system, a problem had already begun forming long before anyone could feel it, and it was invisible. Cruise flight is often misunderstood by passengers. It feels like the safest part of the journey, and in most cases, it is. The climb is over. The aircraft has reached altitude. Cabin movement becomes smoother. The workload inside the cabin appears calmer. To most passengers, it feels like the moment the stressful part of flying has already passed. But inside the aircraft, cruise is not a passive phase. It is a balancing act. Engines under constant load. Systems continuously monitored. Mechanical parts rotating at extremely high speeds for long durations. Every component operates within carefully calculated tolerances. Modern aircraft are designed with redundancy and safety margins. But aviation depends heavily on something passengers never see: metal enduring stress repeatedly over time. Every takeoff, every landing, every climb, every vibration. Thousands of cycles accumulate slowly across years of operation, and most of the time, those systems perform exactly as intended. On Flight 529, nothing appeared abnormal. There were no warnings, no alarms, no cockpit distress. The aircraft held altitude, the engines produced expected power, everything stayed within normal operating parameters. Inside the cockpit, the pilots continued the routine flight duties, monitoring instruments, communicating with air traffic control, managing a flight that, so far, gave them no reason for concern. Passengers remained relaxed. Some may have been reading. Others might have flipped through magazines or resting quietly as the aircraft continued west across Georgia. From the outside, Flight 529 looked completely stable. But stability in aviation can sometimes be deceptive, because an aircraft may appear perfectly healthy right up until the moment something hidden finally fails. Deep inside the left propeller assembly, one of the blades had already been weakened by fatigue, cracking, a defect so small it could not be seen by passengers. And under normal circumstances, not something the crew could detect in real time from the cockpit. Metal fatigue is one of aviation's quieter dangers. It is not explosive, nor immediate. It develops slowly, microscopic damage accumulating over thousands of operational hours. Tiny structural weaknesses growing incrementally with every cycle of stress and vibration. A component may continue functioning normally for months, even years, while the damage inside it quietly spreads. And that is what made situations like this especially dangerous. The aircraft can feel completely normal until the exact second it no longer is. Inside the left engine system, the propeller blades were spinning at tremendous speed, thousands of rotations every minute. The forces acting on them were enormous, and somewhere within one blade, the metal had reached a critical point, not because of one dramatic event, but because repeated stress over time had gradually weakened its internal structure beyond safe limits. The crack continued growing invisibly during previous flights, through takeoffs, through landings, through normal operation, until eventually, the blade could no longer contain the force being placed upon it. At 18,000 feet over rural Georgia, Flight 529 was still in stable cruise mode. The passengers remained unaware. The crew remained focused on routine monitoring, and the aircraft continued forward exactly as expected. No turbulence severe enough to alarm the cabin, no emergency call transmitted to controllers, and still no visible sign that catastrophe was only seconds away. Because the danger aboard Flight 529 was not building inside the cabin. It was building inside rotating metal, moving faster than the eye could follow. And when failures happen at those speeds, they do not unfold gradually. They arrive violently. No one on board knew that a single hidden fracture inside a propeller blade was approaching its breaking point. And when it finally did, it would not be subtle. At cruise altitude, without warning, the left propeller suffered a catastrophic structural failure. Over thousands of flight cycles, repeated stress had slowly weakened one of the propeller blades, until it finally failed, and one of the propeller blades broke free. The failure was immediate and violent. Witnesses on the ground later described hearing a loud explosive sound overhead. Some compared it to a cannon blast. Others described a rapid metallic pounding echoing through the sky. Inside the aircraft, the effect was even more severe. The moment the blade separated, the carefully balanced rotation of the propeller system was destroyed. A turboprop relies on precise symmetry between rotating blades. When that balance is lost, vibration is not just a side effect, it becomes a force. And at thousands of revolutions per minute, that force becomes enormous. The aircraft began to shake violently. Passengers suddenly felt the cabin lurch. Seats rattled, interior panels trembled. The smooth rhythm of cruise flight disappeared almost instantly. What had felt safe moments earlier like a routine commuter flight now felt unstable and unpredictable. Inside the cockpit, the the pilots immediately recognized something was seriously wrong. The controls reacted violently in their hands. Instruments fluctuated. The aircraft's normal handling characteristics began breaking apart under the stress of the imbalance. And the problem was no longer isolated to the propeller itself. The separated blade had unleashed massive destructive forces through the left engine assembly. The engine mounts absorbed violent shock loads. The internal components began failing under the strain. Debris and force damaged surrounding systems. What started as a propeller failure was rapidly becoming a broader aircraft control emergency. Investigators would later determine that the violent imbalance damaged parts of the left engine and nearby aircraft systems. Some of those systems helped the pilots control and stabilize the aircraft in flight. The aircraft was still airborne, still technically capable of flying, and with every second, the crew was losing more control over it. For passengers inside the cabin, confusion spread quickly. Some reportedly looked out the windows toward the damaged engine. Others tried to understand whether the vibration meant turbulence, engine trouble, or something far worse. But even those who could see the left side of the aircraft may not have fully understood what had actually happened. Because the danger aboard Flight 529 was not only the engine itself, it was the chain reaction unfolding afterward. The left engine began degrading rapidly as the crew fought to stabilize the aircraft. The vibration intensified, the drag on the aircraft increased, and aerodynamic performance began slipping away. Every passing second placed more stress on the aircraft structure and more pressure on the pilots attempting to keep it under control. And now, at 18,000 feet over Georgia, a routine commuter flight had become a full-scale emergency. The failure did not remain isolated, it spread. The violent oscillation caused by the missing propeller blade began damaging surrounding systems throughout the aircraft. Hydraulic lines were compromised. Control components were affected. Structural stress continued rippling through the left side of the aircraft. What had begun as a propeller failure was now becoming something far more dangerous. An aircraft slowly losing its ability to respond normally to pilot input. Inside the cockpit, the situation escalated rapidly from abnormal to critical. Captain Edwin Ganaway and First Officer Matt Warmerdam began working through the emergency while the aircraft continued shaking violently around them. Power adjustments were attempted, emergency procedures were initiated, communications with air traffic control began, as the crew reported the failure and started searching for a place to land. But the aircraft was now operating in a condition it had never been designed to sustain. The vibration made even basic control inputs increasingly difficult. Under normal conditions, aircraft controls are smooth, responsive, and predictable. But aboard Flight 529, the damage and imbalance were creating constant resistance through the airframe. Every correction required effort, every movement carried instability. And as aerodynamic performance continued deteriorating, maintaining altitude became harder. The aircraft began losing its ability to remain fully controllable in normal flight. At the same time, the crew faced another problem common in aviation emergencies, which is time compression. When failures happen suddenly, seconds begin disappearing faster than decisions can comfortably be made. Pilots must diagnose the emergency, communicate with controllers, manage aircraft systems, and attempt recovery procedures simultaneously, all while the aircraft itself continues changing underneath them. And Flight 529 was continuing to degrade. At this point, the aircraft was no longer simply experiencing an engine issue, but experiencing a cascading structural emergency in the air. The crew needed a runway, but they were still far from any airport, and with every passing minute, the aircraft was becoming harder to save. The crew then made a decision to attempt an emergency landing, which made the priority shift immediately from continuation of flight to survival. The pilots worked hard to maintain control while searching for a suitable landing location below. But the aircraft's condition continued worsening with every passing moment. At the same time, they made a critical decision, which later defined the outcome of the flight. They avoided steering the damaged aircraft toward populated areas. That choice reduced the risk to people on the ground, but it also narrowed their landing options significantly. Inside the aircraft, the violent vibration continued tearing through the airframe. The systems remained under strain. Control of the aircraft grew heavier and less predictable. Time was becoming the most limited resource available, and altitude was slowly disappearing. Flight 529 was no longer simply flying. It was fighting to stay intact. As Flight 529 descended lower over rural Georgia, the crew fought to keep the aircraft controllable as it dropped toward open farmland near Carrollton. But the vibration never stopped. The damage was already too severe. Moments later, the aircraft hit the ground with extreme force. It tore through the field, broke apart on impact, and immediately erupted into flames as fuel ignited across the wreckage. Inside the cabin, the final seconds became chaotic. As smoke filled the air, the fire spread fast, and passengers attempted to escape through broken sections of the fuselage, while some remained trapped. Emergency crews rushed in, but the destruction left little time for immediate rescue. Out of the 29 people on board, 9 initially lost their lives. 1 more later died from severe burn injuries, and many survivors suffered life-altering burns and trauma. What began as a routine regional flight from Atlanta had ended in one of the deadliest commuter airline disasters of the 1990s. In the aftermath, investigators worked to understand how a stable cruise flight became a catastrophic in-flight emergency. Early findings ruled out weather, collision, or any outside interference. The focus quickly shifted inward to the aircraft itself. What they uncovered was devastatingly simple. A fatigue crack had formed inside a propeller blade on the left engine. Over thousands of flight cycles, microscopic stress slowly weakened the metal until it finally failed in mid-air. That single break triggered violent imbalance, which damaged the engine, disrupted critical systems, and made the aircraft increasingly impossible to control. A chain reaction that unfolded in seconds. Flight 529 became a reminder of something aviation engineers already knew. But the world rarely sees that aircraft failures do not always begin with dramatic events. Sometimes, they begin with invisible stress. A fracture too small to detect in time. A flaw hidden deep inside a component. A system operating normally, right up until the moment it no longer can. This accident reinforced inspection procedures for propeller systems and fatigue monitoring in commuter aircraft operations. It also strengthened the understanding that mechanical integrity is not just about performance. It is about time, cycles, and unseen wear. Because in aviation, safety is not maintained by one barrier. It is maintained by many. And when even one of them fails without warning, the entire system is tested. In many ways, Flight 529 was still flying normally until it wasn't, and that is what makes it difficult to forget. Not because it was unpredictable, but because everything looked predictable, until the moment it wasn't. 10 lives were lost that day. Others survived with injuries that would last a lifetime, and the industry walked away with another reminder written in metal, fatigue, and fire, that silence in aviation is never truly silence. Sometimes, it is a warning without sound, not as a memory, but as a correction. Rest in peace to all souls aboard Atlantic's Southeast Airlines Flight 529, August 21st, 1995. This is Tragic Flights. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.